Oh boy, it seems like a day doesn't go by when there's something fucking going on with the gaming industry. Well, as you guys probably know, there's a controversy happening with Assassin's Creed. It's great that we can have a industry like gaming just be so peaceful and with no problems at all. Clearly, I'm fucking kidding, okay? There are a lot of problems with Assassin's Creed. I think a lot of people have pointed out the incredibly predatory nature of Ubisoft's games, but I'm here to talk about a more contentious idea, a problem that's more closer to my tiny little baby heart, which is clearly the historical accuracy of Yasuke. Now, this has been a massive issue on the Twitter sphere for such a long time. It's been a couple of weeks at this point. And there's some arguments to be said, and there's some bad arguments to be said. So clearly, I should probably specify that, yes, Yasuke was a real person. He was a black man in Japan during the Sengoku Jidai. However, and this is really where my issue comes with, the people who are really defending this idea. First of all, why did they choose to have Yasuke be one of the central characters for us to play through? If you actually know about Yasuke's history, you would know that his history ends after Oda Nobunaga dies, and pretty much does not exist for 2/3 of the major historical events of the Sengoku Jidai. So he's not there during Hideyoshi's rise to power, his claim as shogun, as well as his war in Korea. So he's not involved of any of that. And he's not involved in Tokugawa's ascension to be the final reclaimer of Japan. So we're talking about a character who is fundamentally not in 2/3 of this very important part of Japanese history. And I watched Ackman's video about this, and honestly, I have to disagree with him on a good portion of this. His point that he makes about historical fiction versus historical accuracy, while on the surface seems like a reasonable argument, but the problem is that the history is being altered so much that what we're talking about is now alternative history. His statement that it doesn't matter if Yasuke was actually a samurai, right? Because there are some conflicting information out there that suggests that he was just the sword bearer of Oda Nobunaga and not actually a samurai. The argument that doesn't matter because this is historical fiction makes absolutely no sense if you change it for anyone else. So, say we're going to make a historical fiction about the Revolutionary War. George Washington is no longer the commander of the Revolutionary Army. He's now a foot soldier. Do you see how drastically we have changed the war? And it's no longer the Revolutionary War. We have now created this alternative history, which is perfectly fine to do, right? But why even have this statement about historical fiction when we're not even talking about historical fiction? We're talking about alternative history at this point. It's like a what if, right? Which leads me to my next point that a lot of people have said, which is, Assassin's Creed has a lot of historically inaccurate moments, right? It's a story about a bunch of aliens creating artifacts, right? Why do you care about historical accuracy, right? Which, first of all, I don't. I think it's perfectly okay to have Yasuke in the game. I just think it was a bad decision and a bad move to have him as the main playable character, or one of the main playable characters, right? We'll get into this later. But people are saying, why do you care that Assassin's Creed it's not historically accurate? Why do you care? It's like, well, why did they even have these characters in the first place then? Why have historically accurate characters in the first place? Why are we in a Japan that is definitely supposed to be hearkening to the actual history of Japan? Why even have that in the first place, right? If we're going to say that it doesn't matter, that we're going to put like incorrect facts about specific characters in this game, why even have historically accurate characters in the first place? Why have Oda Nobunaga? Just fucking have, I don't know, just have George Washington. Let's put him in the game, right? Why do we even care? And that's ultimately a bad argument because we understand why they did that. We understand why they're using historically accurate characters because they're trying to connect the link of Assassin's Creed with our world, right? They're trying to say, hey, This world and our world are very similar, which is a very good narrative tool to use. But obviously, when you're pushing it to a point where historical accuracy is not even considered anymore, right? And I'm not saying you have to die on this hill of historical accuracy. I'm not that kind of writer, right? I think if you want to manipulate the history of our world in order to fit your story, that's perfectly fine. But when you have a series that was built on this idea that you're going to live through periods and eras that are part of our history as human beings, right? Then you have to have some level of authenticity when it comes to that stuff. And we know why they did this, right? I think this is the part that annoys me the most, which is anyone who's actually arguing for him to be in the game, we know why Ubisoft put him in the game. It wasn't because they genuinely thought that his story was super interesting. He doesn't even have that complicated of a story, right? It's not because they really thought, oh my god, reading about him just made me so inspired because he had such a great character and all this other stuff. It's not that. We know it's not that. It's because, hey, there's a black man in Japan. Let's put him in the game. That's going to be so great for everyone who basically, wants to be represented, right? And I'm not the kind of person to point out wokeness and everything, right? Going back to the video with Ackman, right? I didn't even know the fact that people were annoyed that there was a black man in the cover of Battlefield 1 because it made zero fucking sense, all right? The Africans were involved in World War 1. That's why it's the World War, okay? Anyone who made that argument, you're a fucking idiot, all right? If you genuinely made that argument without any consideration to the fact that the Africans were actually a part of World War One, I'm not going to call you racist, but I will say that you should probably check yourself because you're teetering on the border of racism, right? You're very close to that. So you should really consider, hey, do I dislike this particular media because it is pandering? Or am I just a racist, right? I think you might genuinely need to have that conversation. But for this situation, everyone fucking understands why Ubisoft did it. It's for equity. It's for inclusion. That's why they decided to have his fucking background music be hip-hop inspired with Japanese instruments in the background. There's no way that you can sit there and tell me, no, that's because, as you know, the black people invented hip-hop. So we need to have that in there. Despite the fact that, of course, Africa is its own continent with many different tribes and cultures. The Africans sold other Africans into the transatlantic slave trade. And hip-hop did not exist for like 400 plus years until, black people in America, black Americans created it. It wasn't Africans in Africa who made it. It was black Americans in America who made that type of music. So again, this is just pandering through and through. And you know it, and I know it. So don't sit there and try to say, no, there's a genuine reason why they decided to add this character. You and I both know why they did it. We're not even going to get into the fact that there has been this weird push to have more black inclusion into Japanese culture. If you think I'm joking, then you can look up this video explaining why the reason why black people love anime is because, as it turns out, Japanese culture is it's African.
Y'all ever wonder why black folks love anime so much? What if I told you that there's a connection between West, North, East Africans, and East Asians?
Didn't you know it's African culture? If you think I'm fucking with you, I'm not. That's a genuine statement that a man has said. He makes these wild claims like the first Buddha was black.
Now look at one of the early depictions of Buddha from around 700 AD in Thailand. You will see the Negroid features that this statue has. It's very clear and evident.
First of all, Buddhism is not a Japanese religion, right? It is a religion that's in Japan, but it's not what you would call a Japanese religion, right? If you talk about Buddhism, most people assume Chinese, Indian, right? As it turns out, the first Buddha was most likely a Nepalese prince. So it's definitely not Japanese. The Japanese religion is actually Shintoism. So, and again, this guy makes some insane claims about how a lot of these African languages are similar to Japanese language, and this is why black people love anime.
However, my focus will be primarily Japan today because we're talking about anime. Starting with the Japanese language, every word in Japan pretty much ends in a vowel. Niger-Congo languages follows the same rules as every word pretty much ends in a vowel. Did you know that Tokyo, the capital of Japan, used to be called Edo? Surprisingly, the capital of Nigeria is also called Edo. If we compare the Japanese language and the Yoruba language, a Niger-Congo language, we will find that there are many similarities between them, and not just similarities, but same word meanings. The same goes for the Igbo language.
Again, I am not one to discourage inclusion inside of media, but there has been this weird push to somehow appropriate the culture of the Japanese, which is ironic because the same people who are like defending this are going to be the same people that will scream in your face if you decide to ever have dreads as a non-black person. Because as you know, physical characteristics are clearly cultural appropriation, but actually, taking the culture and the history and the ideas from another culture and saying that the whole thing about that's actually our culture, right? We inspired you to make that. That's not cultural appropriation.